fentanyl poisoning, the number one killer of 18 to 45-year-olds right now. 2 milligrams of fentanyl will kill you in 2 minutes. It has infected the entire drug supply. If you get a counterfeit Oxycontin, Xanax, Percocet pill, the chances are 7 in 10 it has a lethal dose of fentanyl. The 1960s are over. The idea that you can take drugs, it's not going to kill you, it's over. Yeah. The chances of dying from the illegal drug supply now are worse than playing Russian roulette with one bullet.
In the immortal words of Rodney King, can't we all just get along? Nathan Hochman is the district attorney of Los Angeles, a Republican who was elected with a 20+% margin in that predominantly Democratic county. The things that Nathan and other people are doing should give us great hope as we celebrate 250 years of democracy in this country. Nathan, welcome to SmarterUmedia.
Great to be on. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Well, I'm going to get you straight to our chicken timer, CT, who flies in from all directions at all times, because we're promising our audience that you're going to help make us smarter about whatever you'd like in 2 minutes. So Nathan Hochman, make me smarter.
All right. So what I've implemented in Los Angeles County is an approach I call the hard middle approach to criminal justice. What I did is I got rid of the political ideology that used to govern here in Los Angeles, in addition to the two things that should govern, which are the facts and the law of every case. The political ideology that I actually replaced was called decarceration. It said that there are certain crimes and certain criminals that would not be prosecuted no matter what the evidence or the law showed. But I didn't get rid of that to implement a different political ideology called mass incarceration. Again, I believe that these extreme ends of the spectrum don't do justice. You actually have to look at each case individually. In fact, put in the hard work. I call it the hard work middle, or just short, the hard middle. And what the hard middle is you look at each case individually, the individual defendant and their criminal background. You look at the crime committed and the impact on the victim to determine who the true threats are to public safety. And yeah, they're going to have to go to jail. And as importantly, the ones that aren't. Your first-time nonviolent offender, for example, still has to pay a debt back to society. They violate society's laws. But that's where non-prison alternatives come to play. Community service, restitution, pay it back if you stole something, or you have a serious drug addiction. We'll give you a diversion program where you make the choice, prison or an 18-month rehab program. That's what the hard middle is all about.
Wow, look at that. 25 seconds allows all that work since moot court. And I was with you when you were up at Stanford Law School and you were working on your moot court presentation. So, you know, all of that's paid off. And I have 25 seconds that I get to somehow deploy in my day that I can thank you for. So we appreciate all of that. The hard middle. I love the fact that you put hard in there for the simple reason that.
The simple reason that it's not easy. Hard sometimes get hard labor or a hard result. Actually, the result is the product of the hard work. So I tell all my prosecutors, when you enter that courtroom, you're going to know the facts and the law better than everybody, the defense attorney, the judge, anybody else in that courtroom, so that you can be the one that everyone else relies on. But then you have to make hard decisions. And hard decisions can often be, in certain cases, that you're not going to throw the book at someone, but they are going to be held accountable for their actions. I actually attended recently a drug court where they did the graduation of 12 people who basically started at rock bottom, serious drug addictions, doing low-level crimes, and their lives were going absolutely nowhere. In fact, just getting worse and probably going to end in death, given that fentanyl is such in the drug supply. But each one of these individuals used the criminal justice system to hit rock bottom. And so I actually showed up in a courtroom in Alhambra, one of the cities here in Los Angeles County, 12 people who had done this 18-month program, who basically had their parents, their brothers, their sisters in the audience, got to give a little speech to the court, to a judge with a robe on, explain where they came from, explain the hard work that they had put in. And at the end of it, the judge gave them a certificate and turned to me. And the district attorney himself does not show up at too many proceedings, but I was there. And he said, "Mr. Hochman, do you have a motion?" I said, "Yes, Your Honor. we moved to dismiss the charges in the interests of justice. Because on that day, the interests of justice actually led me to go ahead and dismiss charges. Now, I often announce arrests, convictions, sentences, but justice that day required me to actually dismiss a charge because that is what the product of the hard work of every participant in that courtroom. And it was a great day for justice.
Yeah, when Arnold Schwarzenegger swore you in as district attorney, you quoted Brady v. Maryland. So I'm going to let you frame your philosophy of what we ought to be doing in offices like yours.
The idea was that the prosecution always wins when justice is done. It actually comes from a Supreme Court case almost 100 years ago. And the Supreme Court didn't say the prosecution always wins when you get a conviction.
Right.
Although very often that is exactly what has to happen in a particular case. We deal with 150,000 cases that the LADA's office files every single year in Los Angeles County. It's the largest local prosecuting office in the nation.
Wow.
But there are occasions where justice actually requires us not to proceed on a case. I've dealt with situations where we have factually exonerated people who got convicted decades ago when new evidence came to light that we were convinced we actually had the wrong people in prison. Now, again, and with drug court, for that example, those are people that generally the society had basically discarded. They just assumed that they were going to be in the turnstile of getting in and out of jails probably the rest of their life till they died. Yeah. But justice actually the criminal justice system helped them hit rock bottom. And it's not often you think of the criminal justice system as a conduit to getting better. But for those 12 people and for a lot more that have gone through drug court, that was their rock bottom moment. So that's the idea, is that the prosecution will always win in Los Angeles and for that matter anywhere in this nation when justice is done.
Which is a lovely concept. I sort of feel like it's hard to disagree, but it seems like when the rubber hits the road, things get complicated, incentives come in, and you talk in the hard middle approach about taking the politics out, right? Getting to the stuff, looking at the facts, looking at the law, and we both know that facts can be pretty slippery, but if that's where you are and you don't have external influence, you should do better. You hope you do better.
100%. I'll give you one example where this is played out very dramatically, which is in death penalty eligible prosecutions.
Yeah.
So my predecessor, the death penalty has been on the books of the state of California for decades. Twice in the last 15 years, it's actually been in front of the voters to eliminate, and twice the voters did not eliminate the death penalty. My predecessor said that there was absolutely no case in which he would impose the death penalty. I came into office and I said, look, I swore an oath to enforce the laws of the state of California, and as long as the death penalty is one of those laws, it's going to be on the playing field for consideration. But what I said also is that we would use it in extremely rare situations. In fact, I gave the examples of the Sandy Hook shooting of kindergartners and the Las Vegas shooting of over 50 people. And I said we would set up a system that would actually impose the most rigorous standards we could come up with to evaluate the aggravating and mitigating factors. We would invite the defense attorney to make a full presentation all the way up to me. I brought in the most senior people in my office. Collectively, they have 200 years of prosecutorial experience, including death penalty experience. And we also meet with the victim families. I must tell you, those are some of the harshest meetings I have. Because there's some family members that come out and they say, look, life without the possibility of parole, which is the only other option. It's either life without the possibility of parole in a first-degree murder case with special circumstances or the death penalty. And some people come in and they say, look, I don't want the state to kill this person. I don't care what they did. Life without the possibility of parole is enough. But I recently had a father who lost his son in an absolutely brutal murder, torture, arson, burn the body, horrible murder. Yeah. And he was talking to me all about his son, how his son played Little League, his son played high school baseball, he never missed a game. And he was a Vietnam vet. And he said, it's really easy for me. They killed my son, they need to die. Full stop. And it's hard to argue. in some ways around that. And I'm certainly going to recognize his viewpoint in that room. And I have to take all the viewpoints in the room, and then I ultimately make that decision on whether or not we're going to pursue the death penalty. I'll tell you, in the year and a half that we've been looking at it, we actually haven't identified a case that has met that standard, though in Los Angeles, you have a number of very, very brutal killings. But that system that we put in has been very rigorous. Tomorrow might be the time that I find one of these cases. But so far, we actually haven't gone forward with the death penalty.
I love that you go straight to the really easy things like the death penalty, because nobody disagrees about it. But honestly, I think that's what's refreshing, right? What you bring. And I don't think it's just you. I think in the world we live in, where we seem to be convinced that we can't talk to each other, don't buy that. I mean, there's no one I can't talk to. I don't think there's anyone you can't talk to if we're open enough and if there's an open enough person on the other side. So to be able to discuss it, if we disagree, we disagree. But once we stop talking, then we never have a chance to learn anything.
100%. I tell people I'm not afraid of information. If people want to go ahead and disagree with me and they have a factual or a legal argument to raise to me, they can raise policy issues, but certainly we're interested in the facts and the law in any particular case. Where we've seen this play out often is officer-involved shootings of individuals. They can often be from different communities, a Black community, the Latino community, the Asian community, or the white community. And those shootings provoke enormous passions amongst the various individuals and groups that are involved. I had a situation where I brought a second-degree murder prosecution against a California Highway Patrol officer who was driving 131 miles an hour without his lights and sirens on, not to an emergency, 1 a.m., crashes into a car, leaves the scene, doesn't rescue the person. Another car who's driven by a drunk driver crashes into that car that's been disabled. It bursts into flame and 4 people die. Jeez. We brought second-degree murder charges against a California Highway Patrol officer. But a month before, I actually moved to dismiss charges against 2 Torrance police officers who basically on one night, they got a call that a car had been stolen. They found the stolen car in a parking lot. They go up along each side of the stolen car. They see an individual in the driver's seat. That individual he's ordered to put his hands on the wheel. But when they look inside the car, in between his legs, they see the butt of what looks like a sawed-off shotgun. So they tell him to get out of the car and keep his hands up. His hands end up dropping from the steering wheel towards his lap, and he ends up getting shot. That case initially wasn't brought by the first DA that saw it, was brought by my predecessor as a voluntary manslaughter case, and eventually came to me to either try the case or dismiss it. I brought in one of the nation's leading experts in police use of force cases. Right. He basically said, we don't have the evidence to prove voluntary manslaughter in this case. We looked at every case. We issued a 26-page single-space memo to the public, analyzing every fact, every piece of law that we had, and showing why we had to move to dismiss, because we couldn't get to beyond a reasonable doubt for voluntary manslaughter. Well, needless to say, this provoked enormous amount of reaction in the community. And I said, look, if you have a disagreement with me on your facts or your law, I will meet with you. This involved a African-American victim. So I actually met with Black Lives Matter. 40 people piled into a conference room, and they gave me their thoughts for well over an hour. And I gave them the 26-page memo, and I said, if there's any additional facts or law that I am missing, please let me know. But I get it, you disagree with the result. But I don't have, if this isn't Nathan Hochman determining what Nathan Hochman thinks is a good idea, this is Nathan Hochman, District Attorney, looking at the facts and the law and seeing whether or not we can prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt. So that's how we approach all our cases. We get it right much, much more than we get it wrong. And when we get it wrong, we're going to step into court and say it.
Well, that's the idea. And you know, because you've been in it for 34 years. I mean, before sitting in this chair, you have been a prosecutor for 10 and on the defense side for 24. So it's not as if the courtroom is new to you. And you and I both know how incredibly meaningful it is to have a legal system, to understand words like justice and try to achieve them. We also know very well how imperfect it is.
You know, you're right. The experience I have more criminal justice experience on the defense side than any of the 800 lawyers that work for me, than any other DA's ever had. 24 years on the defense, 10 on the prosecution side, gives me a 360-degree view of how the system plays out. And often when I'm speaking to young groups, I compare the US system against Europe, Asia, Africa, and I say, look, in many of those systems, there is no justice system. The judge is both the prosecutor, the judge, the jury, and often the executioner. I talk about systems in Europe where you are presumed guilty and you have to prove your innocence, and you're not even guaranteed an attorney to help you.
Yep.
So our system, though imperfect, is easily the best system that has ever been devised, and it falls upon each one of us to make sure that we work the system real hard every single day to make it hopefully a little bit better going forward in the future.
Yeah, the idea of having a belief that that's the job, understanding that you're not perfect, it's not perfect, at least gives you a shot, right? It at least gives you a shot to get it right more times. And that's all I think you can do. That's as far as you can go.
Absolutely. You know, I tell my prosecutors that we embrace that beyond a reasonable doubt standard, highest standard in the land for evidence. And we got to convince in civil cases, it's often you can get away with just convincing 9 out of 12 or 4 out of 6. We got to do all 12 out of 12. And we got to get it right at the highest standard. And again, if it turns out that a jury doesn't think we meet it, so be it. Our job is to make sure that the jury is armed with all the evidence we can possibly bring before them that the judge views as legally admissible. And at that point, we've done our job. So there are jury verdicts that I cannot understand how they got there. In fact, when you talk to them afterwards, it's a little shocking and a little disquieting on how they did get there. But more often than not, much more often than not, the jury gets it right. Again, that's our system. We'll work it every time. And if we win, we win. And if we lose, we don't lose, because the system decided that justice that day was not going to be a conviction.
Do you still think the jury system is a good thing?
Well, it's an interesting, the collective wisdom of 12 people. Any one of those people, you might be a little suspect, but when you get all 12 in a room and they got to sort of agree on something, more often than not, they get it right. So, it's they're evaluating in many cases. It's not the hard evidence. It's not like a document says what it says and both sides agree with that, and now you have to make a decision. It's often you have witnesses that are saying competing things. The light was red, the light was green. And they each had a view for it, and the jury has to evaluate who's telling the truth. They look at the credibility of the witness. They look at their ability to see and testify. They look at whether or not they've said something different in the past. And now maybe they've changed their mind, and if so, why did they change their mind? And so that's that is what we as human beings do on a daily basis. Every time you hear something, you should be evaluating it like a juror evaluates the evidence. The problem is, in our daily lives, we don't get a set of jury instructions on how we are to evaluate different pieces of evidence that we come across every single minute. The jury is a sort of a unique construct that for that moment or those days that they're there, they are isolated in some ways. They're off their phones, or at least they're supposed to be off their phones. They're supposed to be focused. They get instructions on how to evaluate evidence, and if they apply that instruction, then they're supposed to get us to a decent or a verdict backed by the evidence. So I believe in the jury system, even though there are definitely verdicts that I shake my head when I hear.
Sure. And I think, again, the imperfections in the system and humans the way they do. The famous Japanese movie Rashomon, where 5 people witness something, all have a different opinion of what happened, and none of them, they finally show you what, quote, really happened. So truth too, I mean, is a tough thing to come by. More than anything, you try to get as close to the best approximation as you can. Is that right? I mean, that's kind of right.
Well, and that's the design of rules of evidence. In other words, rules of evidence are designed to say that, look, if I saw something, I can testify to it. If I heard someone say something about it, there are restrictions on whether or not I can say, well, I heard from Steve that he saw this. And then maybe I heard from Steve that he heard from Joe that Joe saw something.
Right.
These are levels of hearsay that the rules of evidence actually disallow, unless there's an exception. An example is that, if Joe on his dying breath, the famous dying declaration, say, Jane did it, and then dies. There are exceptions to the hearsay rule, time tested, courts have approved, that say that there's a ring of truth to some dying declaration that we're at least going to allow the jury to consider. So again, it's interesting when you compare what goes on in a courtroom to what goes on in life. Here people get on their phones every day a stream of information with no rules, by the way, on how to evaluate it. No judge gives you instructions. Here you're supposed to listen to whether or not there's hearsay. You don't have people objecting in real time to your iPhone saying, no, that's triple hearsay. Please don't consider it as fact. And then having a judge actually rule on it. So the courtroom is an interesting place where does truth emerge? I think when you have two sides, an adversary system, and they're really doing their best to expose all the fault lines in the truth, that it at least helps the truth emerge. I can't guarantee it emerges in every case. We try. But, it's certainly a much more interesting forum to try and get to the truth than daily life is when you're sitting on your news feed and trying to evaluate what's going on.
Yeah, you just ran for public office. I know that's a surprise to you. What a process. I mean, talk about where information, you may love the First Amendment, but not every day if you're running for political office. How was that experience?
I understand why people don't want to run for political office in this country.
Yeah, man.
I mean, that part is brutal. People just say stuff that's completely not true. They do it fairly anonymously. It's borderline, I'm Jewish. I can't tell you the amount of anti-Semitism that has been on various feeds directed at me, going all the way up to death threats. I've had people march on my home. It's a real sacrifice, not just for me, and I signed up for it, but the whole family. Yeah. I have security. I've never had security in my life. I have security on a daily basis. Yeah. Hopefully I'll never need it, but there are situations where we're dealing with threats in real time.
Of course.
And so this is I do this for the opportunity to have one of the best jobs you can possibly have as a lawyer in Los Angeles County, being the district attorney. But the process to get there, absolutely brutal. And the process even to deal with it on a daily basis is brutal. Because the discourse is not very polite. Now, I must say, for every one person that goes ahead and engages in a screed or an anti-Semitic rant or just is pretty vile and hurtful, I got hundreds of people who have come and supported me, which is fantastic. In fact, that's the silver lining. I'll be out to dinner, and someone will come up to me and just shake my hand and say thank you, and introduce themselves, and people I would never otherwise have met, and they kind of understand it's a difficult job, but I welcome the challenge. I'm sorry that my family probably didn't sign up as much for the challenge, but they've been enormously supportive. In fact, I'll give you one example where I kind of maybe pulled a little fast one on my family, and they kind of shook their head, but they're now supporting me. We have a park in Los Angeles. It's called MacArthur Park.
Sure.
MacArthur Park is for LA what Central Park is for New York.
Right.
It is a beautiful park on the sort of outskirts of the skyline of downtown Los Angeles. And for decades, it was named after General Douglas MacArthur. I mean, it goes back to the 50s. Yeah. It was a beautiful park with a lake in it until the last 30 years. It's become an open air drug market, a homeless encampment. You're more likely to find people dying from fentanyl overdoses than you are people picnicking there. So I got fed up. I said, we got a series of problems, and the epicenter in some ways is MacArthur Park. We got drug dealing, we got gangs, we got people being extorted, we have people dying from drug overdoses, and you otherwise have a beautiful park that the public can't use.
Yeah.
So we, working with local, state, and federal authorities, we've now engaged in a 3-phase plan to, we call it Operation Free MacArthur Park. So we went after the gangs to begin with, then the major drug dealers, and now we're going into the park every week. And about 2 weeks ago, I was interviewed by the press, and I'm describing this, and I said, here's what we're going to do. Labor Day weekend, I'm going to have a picnic in the park with my family. I invited all of my family members, including my grandsons. I've got one that's a year and a half old and one that's a week old. The week old can stay behind. He didn't have to show up at my picnic. And I invited the mayor, I invited the city council, the board of supervisors, and the entire public to join me Labor Day weekend, because we are going to make that park so safe for the public that we can have this picnic. Now, then I went home and told my family I did this. They actually already knew, because they apparently, their friends were watching the social media feed as it was happening. And by the time I got home, they already knew that I'd made this promise. But to their credit, they said, okay, we'll get the picnic basket ready. We're going to show up, and you better make sure that park is clean. I said, okay, I'll do my best to make sure that park is clean and safe, and we will enjoy a wonderful picnic on Labor Day weekend.
Well, that's fantastic. And I think people are always looking for ways to address those particular problems, all of which are interdependent. You had 6 task forces, right? 6 tasks. Say that, task forces. There we go. Six task forces that you sort of have started since you came in to address things that oftentimes feel like they're just unconquerable. You start usually with fentanyl.
Yeah, and it's so when I was campaigning, I would ask people, what is it about public safety that you have the most concerns about? And so we identified these 6 priority areas that we then turned into task forces to address them from day one. One was fentanyl poisoning, the #1 killer of 18 to 45-year-olds right now. 2 milligrams of fentanyl will kill you in 2 minutes. It has infected the entire drug supply. If you get a counterfeit Oxycontin, Xanax, Percocet pill, the chances are 7 in 10 it has a lethal dose of fentanyl. And I've met way too many parents and families that have lost sons and daughters to fentanyl, and we are going to war at both the enforcement level and the education level. Yeah. Because I tell people, I say, especially when I deal with high schoolers and middle schoolers and their parents, I said the 1960s are over. The idea that you can take drugs, it's not going to kill you, it's over. Yeah. The chances of dying from the illegal drug supply now are worse than playing Russian roulette with 1 bullet. That's 7 in 10 of those pills will kill you. 1 in 6, if you spin the revolver, will kill you. And so the odds are actually worse than Russian roulette. Yeah. So we have done that. We have seized more fentanyl in a year and a half than they had in the prior year and a half. And we seized enough to kill every person in Los Angeles County, and there's 10 million of us, 3 times over. That's a lot of illegal doses. Wow. And that's the stuff we've seized. Yeah. Put aside all the stuff that's already on the street. We also identified human trafficking. Sadly, LA County is the epicenter in the nation for human trafficking. Young girls and young boys every single day in 5 major corridors in Los Angeles County are being peddled for sex. You know, they basically call it modern day slavery. And we've gone out and done press conferences from literally these 5 corridors to say we're going after the human traffickers, the predators, the pimps, but we're also going to go after the Johns, the sex buyers, because they are the demand side of the human trafficking equation.
100%.
And I can reduce the demand. Hopefully, it also affects the supply side. And then we're getting services for all the young sex workers and sort of break the bond between them and their pimp. We also identified homeless crime, hate crimes, organized retail theft, and residential burglary. And again, I'm coming into a situation where a lot of the enforcement and accountability hadn't occurred for 4 years. So we've had to rebuild a whole bunch of trust and accountability in our community. And what's wonderful is that people are pitching in. And it's not only my own prosecutors and law enforcement, it's the community. I go out to neighborhood associations and I tell them, look, I need your eyes and ears. And so the calls are coming in, law enforcement's responding to it. And our ultimate goal is to get to I'll call them the would-be criminals. These are the criminals that are thinking, should I do that crime today? I'm hoping that what we can do is deter them from actually committing that crime, saving the victim in the process. And I've actually said very publicly that if all I've done after 4 years is fill the prisons to the breaking point, I have failed. And so I said the effective measure of a criminal justice system is deterrence. Can I deter the criminal from committing the crime and save the victim in the process?
It's so holistic. I mean, our systems are all interdependent. And so if we and any society don't have jobs, we don't have things to do, we don't have meaning, we don't have purpose, then of course there will be all of those other things. So your holistic approach to things like homelessness to me are really important for us to keep working on because it doesn't end. There's hope when we have a discussion or we pass a law that somehow now this is going to solve it. That's not what any of those problems are like.
You're absolutely right. I mean, homelessness is probably one of certainly for California, writ large, LA County, LA City. A third of the nation's homeless are in California. LA County has over 70,000 homeless people. Here in the county, LA City has about 40,000. They have spent literally billions of dollars in California to try and deal with this problem. The problem has gotten worse, not better. No matter what the statistics show you, I know I get the real statistics, and homelessness has not gone down. And I'll give it LA as an example. See, in the last 4 years, they've spent $350 million in a program called Inside Safe. What happens is they provide hotel rooms or motel rooms, often for the homeless. They show up and then they leave. Yet they keep paying for the hotel or motel room for the remainder of the 30 days because they don't pair the homeless individuals, over 70% of which have mental illness or a serious drug addiction, with the services they need. The entities that do that, we have one called the Union Rescue Mission. It puts the homeless location where they're going to sleep in the top floors of a building. On the bottom floors, they have a cafeteria. The dental folks from USC show up twice a week. They have medical services 24/7. They have AA classes. They have mental health classes. And sure enough, their retention rate's about 70%, where everything else is roughly 20%.
Yeah.
So it shows, to your point, if you take this holistic approach, because I can't imprison my way out of the homeless problem. It doesn't work. The largest
We've
homeless
tried.
shelter.
I mean, this is not. There's data. It's not. Doesn't work, right?
No.
This mass incarceration. You're not the mass incarceration guy for a reason because it doesn't work.
The largest homeless shelter in the LA County, which makes it one of the largest in the world, is the LA County jail system.
Yeah.
Over 4,000 homeless individuals have a home. It's just that night going to be in a cell in the LA County jails. That is not a solution. In fact, the LA County jails aren't equipped to deal with that mental illness and drug addiction problem on a long-term basis. But if people are committing crimes, they're going to spend some time there, but then we got to partner them with the treatment facilities when they get out so they actually don't get involved in that revolving door to get right back into jail. Yeah. So on the one hand, I have very little tolerance for individuals who want to occupy public space and ruin it and commit crimes and defecate wherever they want to defecate, scream and rant and rave and threaten people. I have very little patience for having no level of accountability for those individuals. But on the other hand, I have no patience for thinking that we can just jail our way out of the problem. So to your point, I need everybody. This is an all hands on deck operation if we really want to make a serious dent in the homeless problem here in LA County. And quite candidly, if we can make a serious dent in LA County, that will be the model for every other city, given the extent of the problem across this entire country.
Before, during, and after is one of the things you talk about. See, look, I actually did some research.
Nice.
Before, during, and after is a key to getting people back into being productive members of our society, which we'd all like to be.
And that's exactly right, because a DA can just easily focus on the during. In other words, they come in, law enforcement hands us a case, we prosecute the case, we get whatever verdict we're going to get on a case and a sentence, move on to the next case. And as I said, we got 150,000 of those cases office-wide every single year. Yeah. But that's not going to solve the problem. That's not going to make our community a lot safer if we don't also focus on the before aspect. Often that's an education level. Often that's focused on two major pipelines to the criminal justice system, which are young people and people coming out of prison. With young people, I got to educate them to a different path and hopefully get them a good education. With prisoners, we got to get them a productive skill set while they're in prison. Because if you don't have a productive skill set when you come out and you're a convicted felon, good luck in getting a job. Good luck in providing for yourself. And very often, the recidivism rate, which is the rate at which they'll go back and commit a crime within 2 years, it's over 50%. Right. So what have we really accomplished? We warehouse people for a little while, and then they're right back committing more crimes and hurting people in the community. So that's the concept of before, during, and after that a DA's office needs to actually be a player in, but certainly we can't do it alone, and that's why we reach out to all the different organizations to help.
Well, I love that you're doing it. I know Nathan Hochman for, I don't even want to count how many years now, but I always thought of you as one of the funniest guys I know. I always thought of you as a great sense of humor. You and I got in trouble even for pulling off various things while we were practicing law for a summer together at Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher. How in the world do you go through 34 years and now heading into this next phase of your career in that system without it wearing you down? How do you keep your sense of humor? I mean, how does it not? I mean, how do you see all that and not unsee it for a minute?
It really is compartmentalizing on a daily basis. Sadly, the stuff that I see every day of what one human being will do to another human being, it is, I can't even begin to tell you. The cases that I've read of the most brutal murders, tortures, arsons, the sex crimes, the domestic violence, the fraud, people stealing the life savings of the elderly, the cyber hacks where people just rip off someone's identity and they don't care. The amount of, again, cruel treatment. I dealt recently with a whole series of animal cruelty cases, what people were doing to dogs and cats and rabbits. In addition to what they're doing to human beings, off the charts. But you come home at night, and I'm blessed with having an off-the-charts family.
Yes,
I must give Steve credit where credit is due, because I would not have actually started dating my wife, but for Steve Lipscomb's practical joke, where, and I'll tell your listeners this very quickly. Steve and I used to work at the same firm for a summer. He kept working there, and I became a federal prosecutor, but Steve invited me out to lunch. I go out to lunch, and there's two associates, female associates from his firm, who invite us over to the table, one of whom is named Vivian. And so at the end of lunch, Steve said, "What do you think?" Because I was single at the time. I said, "Well, they're lovely." So I get back to my office, and there are two messages. And this is the days before email. I'm dating myself. There's two physical messages, one supposedly from Vivian and one from the other woman, inviting me out to lunch on separate days. I'm thinking that was the greatest lunch I ever had. So I call them up, and they put me on the speakerphone. They start to scream at me. "How could you invite us out to lunch on separate days?
Oh,
You know we're friends." And I said, "I didn't invite you out to lunch. You invited me out to lunch." And we went back and forth, and we eventually realized Steve ran back to his office, called everyone pretending to be the other people's secretaries, and created this wonderful confusion. Well, what ended up happening is I met with both women the next day. We devised a way to get back at Steve, and part of that, and this is the best part of the plan, involved me going out with Vivian to help make this practical joke on Steve work. Well, I went out with Vivian one night, and we've been going out for 36 years.
that's a good
Married
thing.
for 33 of it. So, Steve, you gave me the love of my life. She is the what actually brings that sanity back after a particularly hard day. So, thank you very much.
Best practical joke that led to beautiful love of all time. That's awesome. That's just awesome. I am going to dare in our last bits of time to get philosophical and go into some of the things that you and I have talked about for all of our lives. I mean, you're at the epicenter of all of these things. Why do you think we commit crime? Why does that happen?
So often people commit crimes for a whole variety of reasons. Very often they can, I wouldn't call it stumble into crime, but well, I'll use tax evasion. It happens to be something that teed up yesterday, so I'll give you this example. What often happens is that someone will owe taxes, and they'll think, "Oh, I don't have the money right now to pay it, so I'm not going to file the return." And sure enough, nothing happens. They don't get the knock on the door from the IRS or the franchise tax board here, the state tax authorities in California. So they do it the next year, and they think, "Well, now I owe a lot more money, and well, nobody came knocking the first year, so I'm going to just do it again." And they do it, and then they just keep doing it until eventually it triggers some level of scrutiny. And yesterday we arrested a comedian, actually a very famous comedian who didn't pay taxes, file returns, or pay taxes for 6 years. Owes hundreds of thousands of dollars at this point, and is going to spend the weekend in jail before his arraignment. So you got those type of people. Then you have true sociopaths.
Well, I'm going to stop for a second because I
Okay.
want you to keep going. But I just think what you just gave is one of the best bits of information you could ever get to anyone, but young people particularly, which is if you don't get it, if you haven't figured it out yet, it's harder to do the thing the first time. It's easier every time you do it. And what happens is it builds up. And before you know it, you are facing a prosecutor in one of the 800 offices that are under the district attorney of Los Angeles who now have your case and you're being prosecuted. And it's not a little thing, it's huge.
Absolutely. And that's sort of on one end of the spectrum. Then you start getting at the other end of the spectrum, you have your true sociopaths.
Yeah.
These are people for whom they don't believe the laws apply to them. Right. They just do what they want to do, whether that involves stealing, whether that involves violent crimes, domestic violence, sex crimes. They just, the laws, they do not believe they're governed by the laws. That can either be at the level of mental illness or very close to mental illness, and they're at one end, the other end of the spectrum. Yeah. In between, you have people who flirt with that. They let their anger, their rage, their greed, their sense of, there's no justice in the system, at least for them, overcome what would otherwise guide their good senses. Right. You often see this with drunk driving. There's people, everyone who drives understands that you're not supposed to drink before you drive, or if you drink and you drive, there's a certain level at which you should not get behind the wheel. Full stop. There isn't anybody who's ever driven and also been drinking that doesn't know what that point is. But sometimes they'll take the chance. either because the alcohol is clouding their judgment, or because they've done it before and they're going to do it again, and they don't think anything's going to happen until it does. And often in these situations, it's absolutely vicious. There's a individual who will end up getting harmed or killed. They have an entire family and an entire community that is now grieving. The family for the person who killed them, they're going to be grieving because that person is going to spend a few years, if not a whole lot of years, now behind bars. Maybe they were the family breadwinner, so now you got kids that might be affected. Maybe they employ people, or maybe they were an employee or a key employee for a company. They're gone. So people make often bad decisions instantaneously, giving very little thought to it. So again, you've got your sociopaths who don't believe the laws apply to them. You have your people working off of impulses, making stupid decisions. Someone pushes you, and instead of just dealing with it, you turn around and slug them. They end up hitting the pavement, and they die.
Yeah.
Now you're looking at going to prison for years for an impulsive decision. Then you have the people who are much more calculating. You got your drug dealers, you got your gang members, and this is sometimes a money play. And often money is driving a lot of what's going on because they're looking for weaknesses in the system. A weakness can be someone who's a drug addict and needs the drugs. They're going to do whatever it takes to get you the money to pay for the drugs. A weakness can be stealing from stores where the security is not very high. Where often they've stolen from trains where the train, the cargo in the train slows down as it enters a particular area. They jump on the train, rip off the train, and keep going. You also have that now electronically, which is incredibly scary, where people can steal money from your bank account. People can get fake credit cards in your name, steal your entire identity, do it without leaving wherever they are, anywhere on the planet, and do it in real time and at scale. So the amount of sort of cybercrime out there, it's a different level of motivation for people, and that's just pure greed. And you mix in a little bit of sophistication, you got a problem. And so when I've talked about it very colloquially and informally, I tell people, look, if you are someone who commits a crime once, the likelihood of being caught goes down. If you do it repeatedly, it goes up. If you're someone who's sophisticated and you do it once, the likelihood of being caught goes down. The less sophisticated you do it and the more times, it goes up. Right. But often it doesn't matter on your level of sophistication. It doesn't matter on the number of times you do it, because the most important factor for a criminal is just luck. Because you can get caught the first time something happens, or you might never get caught, or get caught the 50th time, because something might go wrong in your grand plan to make it happen, or the partner in your crime gets caught on a DUI and sells you out. And so you have all these wild factors. This is why so many movies and TV shows and books are written about the criminal justice system and what goes on, because it deals with every aspect of the human existence, all wrapped into, in my world, prosecuting folks at the end of the day.
I think that's a lot to digest. I think as somebody who's in the middle of it, they're all of those things. I go back again to, it sure is a nice thing to realize that you could just be unlucky. So whatever you wind up doing, the first time could be your unfortunate thing, and for the rest of your life's changed.
100%. It's when you're giving advice to especially young people, I think what you hit on earlier is absolutely true. Sometimes it's hard, uncomfortable, difficult, pain in the tush, whatever, to do the right thing, to follow the law. You're late for a meeting. It'd be great if you could just, hit the gas and go 90 miles an hour, blow through a couple stop signs and street lights and make your meeting. But you do the cost-benefit analysis and you think to yourself, well, I might get caught for speeding. Well, I might hit somebody, a car or a pedestrian, and kill them. And so hopefully you say, you know what, it's just not worth it. Who wouldn't want to have a famous, a big house, a fancy car, a lot of jewelry. And that exists in a whole lot of stores, and maybe you don't have the money to pay for it. But you do that cost-benefit analysis and the rules in our society, and you decide, No, it's not worth it for me to just go ahead and steal it. And does it mean that I might not get it in this lifetime? That's possible. But often, hopefully, if you work and things go well, you might get it, although maybe not on the time frame you would initially want it. So these are tough things to tell young people. And you hope that, again, that the system is somewhat just so that the prosecutor is going after the people who are cut in line, who are trying to take the unfair advantage out there. So if you're going to go ahead and follow the rules, you want to make sure that the person who's not following the rules actually has some consequence, so that you don't feel like I was the fool for following the rules because the rules don't apply. That in part is my role. My role is to make sure that the playing field is level, so you don't have people going ahead and getting unfair advantages by breaking all the laws.
I would like to ask for the personal privilege of an extra 10 minutes. Are they going to come and
Yes.
steal you? Can I do that? One of the things we're doing at SmarterU around the July 4th sort of celebrations, we're really talking about democracy. We all seem to be so down in the dumps, like we're going to lose everything. And I certainly hope that doesn't happen. But to find people who are able to actually find ways to bring people together, you are doing that in Los Angeles. Talk to me about what it's like when you go out into communities as a Republican in a Democratic place and yet realize we're all people.
So when I ran for office, I told people about my political journey, even though I was running for a nonpartisan office. It turns out that if you run for a statewide office or a federal office, you have to put an R, a D, or a political party next to your name. But for the LADA's office and local elections, it's nonpartisan. There's no party affiliation next to your name. But I still told people about my political journey. I spent the first 20 years of my voting life as a centrist Democrat, the next 20 years of my voting life as a centrist Republican, and I actually, for this election, registered as an independent. In California, they call it a no party preference. And what I did is I said, look, public safety cuts across political lines. I've yet to meet anyone. I've yet to meet a criminal, by the way, who asks for your party affiliation before they rob you. It's one of the things that they don't ask for. They might ask for a lot, but not your party affiliation. And so when we were dealing with serious public safety issues here in LA County, I went out to the voters, and I would go to the far left leaning voters, and I went all the way to the other extreme on your MAGA Republicans, and made the same exact argument on how I was going to tackle public safety. This hard middle approach gets rid of politics in making decisions. It goes back to the facts and the law. And that's what I've actually tried to implement. And I go out to community organizations. LA's big. We have 4,000 square miles, 100 different languages are spoken in LA County. It really is one of the most amazing but diverse counties in the entire country. Yeah. And so I go out and to these neighborhood associations, to political groups, to everybody. And I tell them my approach. And I said, tell me what you're thinking. And often, again, depending on what the hot button issue is, a death penalty being an example, or some of these other issues, people have very strong opinions. People don't want me to put people in jail. People want me to put more people in jail. And I said, look, I'll do my job, and we'll make sure that each case is treated individually, and we'll figure out hopefully the right mix for punishment for that case. But the one thing I won't do is pretend that people aren't committing crimes who are. And the one thing I'm not going to do is put people in prison to hit a stat number for myself. Neither one of which is going to work. And it turns out that when you focus on issues that people care about, deeply care about, people want the community to be safe for themselves, their parents, their children, their grandchildren, that they will temporarily put politics aside. The reason I was able to get 60% of the vote, even though, again, I ran for office in 2022, I ran for statewide office, state attorney general, as a Republican. I said I was a moderate Republican, but they didn't put the M before the R.
They didn't put that in the staff.
They did not put that anywhere close to the ballot designation. And so but people who were running against me said, oh, he's a former Republican, blah, blah, blah. But people, and the reason I won in a heavily Democratic district where the opponent is labeling me as a former Republican, is that I focused relentlessly on that crossover issue of public safety.
Yeah.
And sure enough, people cared that much to basically give me an overwhelming vote.
And how much does the media play with our minds and our perceptions for how safe we are or anything, right? I mean, how our perception and what's real, you get to see what's on the street. How do they intersect? Pretty good or pretty bad?
So I've come away thinking that yes, there is some fake news out there. And by fake, I mean from real outlets, not just the crackpot who just wants to go ahead and say whatever they will about statistics. I'm talking about real news sources they have engaged in fake news, but they much more engage in what I'll call slanted or biased news. I'll give you an example. I go ahead and bring certain prosecutions or don't bring prosecutions. So the first thing is what the title of the article reads.
Right.
So when I brought, for instance, an officer-involved shootings, I brought as much or more cases than my predecessor, who basically said that his whole deal was to bring cases against police officers. I brought an equal number of cases, but I've also dealt with certain controversial cases where we struck a deal or we even dismissed charges.
Right.
So what did the title of the article read? Did it say that Nathan Hochman is exceeding the prior DA when he goes after police cases? No. Nathan Hochman cuts deals with the police. Nathan Hochman received money from the police. I did receive money from the police. I received 98% of money from non-police sources, but they don't say that. So they print the truth, and then my statement later on is buried on page 8. It's not on page 1. It's not the title of the article, but they would say, oh, we were fair to you because we included your comment. At the very back of the article, if you're still reading, you're an exceptional person, because most people read the first paragraph in the headline. And so that's why I say that news can often be extremely biased and slanted. Not because it's publishing fake news, because everything they said is accurate, but how they slant the presentation of the news is what makes it incredibly biased and slanted.
You and I have lived through the time when the great question is whether propaganda or information are going to win. And not sure, right? Jury's still out. Whenever technology changes, when the penny papers came during the founding of our country, it changed everything. There were lies and all kinds of things that we now know about. I'm hopeful we will figure the technology out so something akin to journalism comes back.
And again, it's an investment in journalism because it's not inexpensive to have reporters spend a lot of time to figure out what the truth is. Yeah. So first, you need a pretty skilled reporter nowadays to sift through a lot of the source documents to actually then report accurately what it is and really dig into the story as opposed to just take it at a superficial level. And we are seeing that more and more newspapers, periodicals, big media outlets are investing less and less in these type of reporters to do this type of journalism. And so and then the people who are not following the rules of journalism, they are the ones that hit the algorithm the best.
Oh yeah,
100%. Yeah, they talk about the most inflammatory stuff, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And they use words that are going to attract your attention. And by the way, the politicians learn the lessons.
Sure.
They understand that if you say something and it takes you 3 minutes to say it, but it's a super bright, nuanced opinion, and you would leave it if you actually listen to it and say, that guy is super bright and really understands how to work through the gray areas of an issue, that person will never be heard compared to the person who can, in a 15-second soundbite, basically say, you suck. And people want to hear you suck as opposed to, let me go through the pros and the cons of this issue and tell you where I would end up.
And yet somehow you were elected. I mean, I say that because quite literally, so often I see as candidates are facing off, and we usually have two candidates because that's the way the system works. And when they're in a general election, so often there's one that is barking and the other one has an actual plan, has a few things that they actually want to do that might make a difference. And it's difficult to see how often the barking works.
You know what? That's a great point. My election was hopefully the start of a different wave in California, maybe nationally, but at least in California, where it's not just, you line up whoever's on what side of political aisle and they vote like lemmings or automatons, no matter who the candidate is. When it came to public safety, and that is one of the few crossover issues, people were willing to get beyond the quick headline, the 15-second soundbite, because they were so concerned about walking outside, or it reached a level of maybe panic in society on whether or not you had to move.
Yeah.
That they were looking for someone with the experience and a game plan that would actually implement it. So what I do every day is I tell people, here's how I'm implementing the game plan I promised you I was going to implement. And if you don't think I'm doing a good job, let me know and tell me how I can do it better.
Yeah.
I've gotten suggestions. I've actually implemented suggestions that I've gotten. Because I tell people I have no monopoly on great ideas, not even close. If you ask my mom, my wife, my kids, they definitely think I don't have a monopoly on great ideas.
Really? They haven't?
Maybe mom is going to give me the benefit of the doubt. My wife and kids, forget it.
Forget it. Yeah.
So I got good training at home on how to be intellectually humble, and try things out, do your best. If it works, scale it up. And it doesn't work, stop and do something different.
I think it's so interesting that the structures matter. And I think in our political systems, we keep trying to find things to tweak. And if you are able to run and you do not have to somehow disclose party affiliation, that's the kind of thing California's been very innovative at trying. The open primaries. You remember Jim Clark, who was at Gibson Dunn. He was a big part of getting open primaries to be a part of the California world, but things that structurally make it so we don't continue to swirl around the whirlpool are meaningful. And I think that's one of them.
I think you're absolutely right. The idea behind the open primary, or they call it the jungle primary, is that the top two vote getters, whether they're different parties or the same party, get to proceed on to the general election. The idea was that if effectively you let Democrats vote for Republicans, or Republicans vote for Democrats, or independents can vote for anybody they want, it's going to push the candidates away from the extremes. Because what we had seen in California, especially before that happened, is that you'd have two fairly extreme people, because those are who came out in the primaries to vote. The people who were the most activists, had the most interest in the party. I mean, to just give you numbers in LA County, we have 10 million people in this county, but we only have roughly, call it 5 million registered voters. Of the 5 million voters, we had about 1.5 million voters in the primary who actually voted. So in a primary, you're often going to get the most activist voters, the people who really are going, are the screamers in our system.
Yep.
And I respect them, by the way, because you want to
voting. Good for them too. Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah.
But often the more apathetic voter, the one that's harder to get, isn't showing up in a primary. But with our open primary system, if you just try to tack to one part of the political spectrum, the chance that the people in the middle are going to beat you is super, super high. Yeah. So in California, we actually ended up this time around, for instance, in our governor election, with a Democrat and a Republican. The Republican almost didn't make it through. I mean, he was in a neck-and-neck fight with another Democrat, but he was able to coalesce enough votes because so many Democrats ran that they split the vote. Yeah. I mean, it's had there only been 4 Democrats that ran instead of 7, the chance that there would have been 2 Democrats in the runoff. Yeah. Which is, by the way, what happened in 2018 when Governor Newsom ran in that particular election, he ended up running against Antonio Villaraigosa, another Democrat, in the general election. So it can happen. And again, if it definitely helps moderate the primary vote. Whether or not it's a good thing, we'll have to see how time plays this one out.
Yeah. Well, I've taken so much of your time, and I'll take more, I promise, in the future. But we always ask people when they come to help us curate our information in some way. We've talked about information and how it can be good, bad, or indifferent. What are sources you think are good that I should or may not know about that I should use more?
Well, when it comes to the law, getting source information is incredibly important, which means you're going to have to dig much deeper than any blog, any streaming service, and whatnot. Yeah. So, for instance, there are law.com type of information sources that'll be the synopsis of decisions coming out in real time. Mm-hmm. They then do a quick analysis. They then give you the decision itself. Now, for non-lawyers reading legal decisions, that can be a bit difficult. But for anyone who wants to really see how the legal system works, you need to actually get to the source documentation and read it. Yeah. So again, having more documentation from sources that are closest, from services that are as close to the source of the documentation, I find incredibly useful. AI is going to help us, by the way. Yep. Because people within the next number of years are going to get their AI agent to go ahead and curate a lot of different sources, and you can set the settings for whatever level you want to set them for. Yeah. Mine are going to be incredibly rigorous. I want to see, I won't believe a fact unless it's being supported by a whole variety of different sources across the whole spectrum, and then linked to the actual source document that I can read if I want to read it. So I think that we're going to see, Steve, in the next couple of years, is the ability to really cut through a lot of the noise. If you want to, it's going to take a bit of effort. What my fear is that people are lazy, that people just go ahead, they get into their silos, they swipe, they get into these doom scrolls, and it just triggers the dopamine in their head, and it's just too entertaining to get away from. Reading a legal decision might not hit you with the dopamine of seeing someone scream, in the middle of a cast and use expletives to describe what's going on. Much more exciting than actually doing the work. Yeah. But I'm hoping that the AI will help people get there, because right now I don't see them getting there on their own.
It's very hard to get there on your own. I mean, no matter how discerning or how deep you want to dig, it can be really tough. So I love that you think that AI will help serve that up to me. I'm with you, and I will go that route for sure. Nathan Hochman, man, District Attorney of Los Angeles. Look at you. It's good to see you, man.
Great to see you as always. And I will tell my wife that I got to speak for well over an hour with one of the most influential people in our lives. So thank you so much.
Well, love to Vivian. Thanks, man.